ITORAH is an action-adventure platformer with enemies and platforming and giant swinging obstacles that you must dodge or else you will take a health hit. Now I wonder if you're here for the same reason that I started looking at this game, because of the graphics. It's absolutely beautiful. I have some amazing shots to show you later. And I generally like these kinds of games. Ori and the Blind Forest or the other Ori game come to mind. There is a warning section later in the video you should stick around for, but first let's get into why you're playing and what you're doing and what's going on. In ITORAH, you play as a human who actually can't talk, which is kind of troublesome, and seems to be the last of their kind. To communicate, you carry around this hammer axe thing, and it talks for you. It speaks about what you might be thinking and what you guys should be doing next and that type of stuff, and it also helps you get around the level and attacking enemies and hooking onto these vine things and breaking large rocks so you can progress. It's an integral part of playing the game. Now, you kind of put all of that aside when you learn that the world is being attacked by some sort of plague and it's infesting all of these different areas, although it seems your existence or awakening is related to the plague. The game is broken up into an overworld, which is pretty light, and you're just using it to get around to these dungeons. This is considered a dungeon. And that's where the meat of the game happens, with all of the platforming and enemies you have to fight, as well as bosses. There's lots of platforming. You have to jump between walls and figure out which way to go in the level, and there's a little bit of backtracking. It's fairly standard and what you would expect in this type of game. Moving on to the combat. This is one of the bosses, and it wasn't that difficult. In fact, I don't find any of the combat to be that much of a challenge. And I want to go a little bit further and say the combat is sluggish and boring. The normal enemies aren't that entertaining. There's a little slug on the ground that you just whack a couple times and nothing really happens. It explodes. You get one little purple crystal and that's that. At some point in the game, I started ignoring all of the enemies and running right by them as much as I could because it was so boring. There just isn't a lot of feedback given to the player that makes it seem like your hits are really connecting or they're that much fun to even do in the first place. Before moving on, I want to talk about how you gain new powers. You absorb them, just like you saw with that boss there, or you find a monument and it's the same procedure. You absorb the crystal, it's a little weird, nobody knows what's going on, and then boom, you have a new power-up. You can now double jump, which is an extremely useful power-up in any game. ITORAH does have an upgrade system, but I want to mention how cool that guy's weapon is with the eyeballs. Just like my weapon, that guy has a cool weapon. None of this is explained. It's just about the coolest people in the game, although he can talk. His weapon doesn't seem to. Anyway, this guy does the upgrades. Unfortunately, it's only health and stamina, and they are kind of expensive. It's also just not required as much as I've played. It just didn't seem like it was that important to get them. One thing to note is that they did borrow or take inspiration from Ori, where you get chased in some corridors and you have to move up away from this plague thing that's chasing you. Reminds me of the segment where you have to climb the tree and the water is filling up underneath you. That's from Ori. The plague one's from this game right here, as you can see. And while you watch me struggle with this, I didn't struggle too bad. I want to talk about how I was getting a little lost because the game seems to duplicate its corridors a lot. It feels like there were some parts that were copy and pasted from one area to another, and it gets a little repetitive. Also, it makes the game seem lifeless since you're looping back through these same sections, or so it seems. And I did get a little lost from time to time. Luckily, there's a map to help you if you are lost, and it shows you exactly where you need to go. But it isn't just the combat that's holding ITORAH back. Don't get me wrong, there are some interesting sections, and when the game does deliver platforming, it is good. It's just everything in between is just not something I'm ready to sit down and slog through to get to the good parts. I know, I just said a lot of bad stuff about this game, and yeah, that's all true. But this part of the game is beautiful. They really took the time to draw everything out. Everything looks visually exciting and interesting. I want to see everything this game has to offer, especially for moments like this, where the gorgeous sunset behind this actually blocks all of the color out from the foreground and makes it dark. It's beautiful, and the music in the background helps with that as well, even though you probably can't hear it because I'm talking over it. But I think you understand what I'm trying to say. The game is beautiful, and there are some good parts, so it's really sad that the other parts aren't good. Overall, ITORAH isn't great, and I'm incredibly sad I have to say that. I know people are going to leave comments that say they enjoy it, and I could see that, but there's so many other more interesting and honestly better games out there that you could be playing instead. And if you played them all, then yes, play this and you could have some sort of fun somewhere. I agree. But this is my opinion, and I'm going to wrap it up here. So hit subscribe, press the like button, follow my content, and enjoy the indie game you're hopefully playing right now.